welcome to Celebration Bar Review and to our continuing series, Hanging Out with Successful Bar Exam Takers. And we have a definite successful bar exam taker with us today. I'm really pleased that one of our students from the Florida February 2016 exam is with us today, Olga Brand. And Olga, we're so glad to have you here. That is a very weird picture behind your head, so I may I may start having like acid flashbacks, but so glad to have you with us, and congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Yeah. So
my husband's a paper artist, so that's what that is.
Okay, there you go. So just before we hit the record button, you were telling me that you're already licensed in Maryland, Virginia, and DC. And then what caused you to want to take the Florida bar exam?
Well, we were living in Baltimore, and I was working for the Federal Communications Commission, so I was a federal lawyer. I'd been at lawyering for 14 years. And my parents and my grandparents have been living in Florida for the last 10, and we visited a lot. And my husband and I, decided that we'd like our children to know that airplanes go places that are not South Florida. The only way that was going to happen is if we moved here and used this as our home base rather than Baltimore. It didn't hurt that this was in the midst of the riots, the Freddie Gray riots, and that's a good impetus to get out of Dodge.
Yeah, sure. And so you moved to Florida, and then realized, oh my gosh, in spite of being barred in 3 other jurisdictions, you have to take the Florida bar exam. What was that like?
Well, I know a lot of people down here already. I know a lot of lawyers down here, most of whom have not taken the Florida bar exam because it's hard and they don't want to. And if they have experience in other places, they just have chosen to either find jobs in-house or try to work for the federal government, which is not so easy down here either, because they wanted to avoid the exam. So I knew coming in that I would have to take the exam to get my license here. And I was clearly not looking forward to it, although I've had a pretty easy time with the 2 bar exams that I took, but that was 14 years and 2 kids and a husband ago.
Yeah, so there is a difference between taking an exam out of law school relatively early in your career, typically before children in many cases, and then being in this situation where now you've got to practice, you've got a family, you've got other responsibilities. Can you talk a little bit about what that meant for you in terms of how to manage your time?
The part that was difficult, initially I was going to self-study. And I thought, well, because I've had such an easy time, I'm a pretty good test taker. I was a Kaplan teacher for years and years and years. So I know I don't get anxiety. I know how to take tests. I finished the Virginia bar exam in about half time, and the Maryland bar exam, which was my first, was no problem, although I've never said that out loud before. Mm-hmm. That's not really something you want to tell people for a lot of reasons. But initially I was going to self-study, and my closest friend from law school had moved to California a few years ago. She was also licensed in Virginia, and she is one of the smartest people that I know. She's just a brilliant lawyer, a brilliant person, like a Duke grad. She knows where it's at. And when she moved to California, she took the bar exam and failed. And I said, wait, what? And she's like, yeah, I failed the bar exam. And I said, no, that's not possible. Anything not be. Yeah, I just, it's different now. I have kids, I have a husband, I have a job. And, just managing that is really a different game than it was when I graduated from law school and then took 3 months to do nothing but hang out and study.
Right.
And went to Barbary classes, and that was my whole day. I did yoga and I studied Barbary. That was pretty much it. Mm-hmm. So with 2 kids and moving and a husband and a family, time management became super important. And it was actually my girlfriend from California who said, you gotta sign up for some kind of class or a tutor or something because it's different now. And I said, holy cow, that's so depressing.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I looked at the other bonds. I wasn't so into that.
Mm-hmm.
And I had read a few articles that were not yours, but that had referenced you.
Mm-hmm.
And from lawyers that I know. And I said, whoa, this sounds more my speed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I talked to you,
mm-hmm.
and you suggested I try to do the self-study.
Right. And just to be clear, that we're talking about the basic mentoring course for those of you that know about our courses. So this is a course in which you had access to all of our materials, but I was not specifically reviewing your work, your essays, right?
Right.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
And, because I've been in practice for a long time and because I've taken bar exams before, I was pretty comfortable that I could do it, but I really just needed just a little bit of structure. Mm-hmm. And that's totally what I got. The plan, or I'm sure that you have a working plan.
So,
layout.
So the study guide. Yeah. Okay.
You stay out of law school for 14 years, you forget the words.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
These terms of art become archaic. That really helped me, although I was slow to start, if you'll recall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this because we said before we came on, Olga and I had what I would describe as a come to Jackson conversation, which doesn't happen a whole lot, but sometimes it does. When somebody it's like, what are you doing? And Olga called me one day and just kind of, you could tell she's kind of a laid back, very confident, very talented person. And she was kind of like, well, I'm just kind of doing this. I'm kind of doing that. And what happened then? Do you recall?
I recall exactly what you said was, you can't just wander into the Florida bar exam and expect to pass. And I said, why not? I've wandered into 2 other bar exams and passed them.
There you go. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You can see that was not the way to do it.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. And so we had a little butt kicking, and but you were a good sport about it, and you were resilient. And I really wanted at that stage for you to recognize that this test was tough. Now, here's the postscript. I don't know if you've seen the numbers yet or not, Olga, because they've just come out this week. The overall pass rate was 58.4% in Florida. That's it. Yes, there you go. That's a legitimate reaction, folks. And for out-of-state attorneys or out-of-state bar takers, it was 48.2%. And these are the lowest numbers, by the way, folks, if you're not familiar with Florida, these are the lowest numbers in 25 years. So as tough as the exam has been, it just got about 15% tougher on this exam. So to my point that you can't just wander into it, and you didn't then. At that point, you changed your study strategy, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So tell us what you did at that point.
So thankfully, I had good support from my husband and my family, so they helped out with the kids a lot and took over some of the mom duties so that what I tried to do was devote a solid 6 hours a day. Well, we had that meeting. It was a little late in the game, so I didn't have that much time.
Right. That's the other part of this is that we were kind of now behind the curve a bit when you had your awakening. So, okay. So about 6 hours a day?
So I spent about a month studying 6 hours a day, and I followed the syllabus pretty closely. I, of course, would hammer more on the stuff that I wasn't so great at, and the stuff that was Florida specific, is what homestead and the taxation stuff. Turns out that was not on the exam at all.
Yeah, and so I want to talk a little bit about this because, again, for those of you that aren't familiar, Florida has always been a relatively predictable state in what it tests and how it tests. And the subjects have been from a fairly narrow list. Well, on this last exam, literally out of nowhere, really, really out of nowhere, and I'm using the official reports here, they tested in essay number 1, criminal law, constitutional criminal procedure, juvenile delinquency, and ethics. Hello, none of that had been, I mean, other than ethics, none of that had been tested as an essay. And then in essay question number 2, they tested federal con law, which they have never done in Florida. I mean, once in 20 years they've done it. And then in question number 3, they tested UCC Article 3 and 9 and rules of professional conduct, right? So who knew, right? It wasn't like you could go in and memorize and be ready for those subjects, because nobody saw those subjects coming, right?
Right. And, you know, I was actually talking to my judge the other day, for whom I was a law clerk right out of law school. She called to congratulate me and whatever. We're very close friends. And I said, do you remember how I used to be really great at con law and policy and, you know, and the high-minded stuff? She said, of course, because that's why I needed you. And I said, well, do you know what 14 years of practice does to a lawyer? I'm great at evidence and civ pro. And she said, well, I wouldn't have seen that coming.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you know, when I felt beaten up by those essays, and that was the first time I've ever felt that way. You know, I took 2 other bar exams. Virginia is, I don't know what Maryland's reputation is, but Virginia has a reputation for being very tough. And that's a jurisdiction where there's 5 essays. Right. And I finished literally in half time. In Florida, I was writing and scrawling until the last seconds. Yeah. And that's never happened to me before. And I'm very good at con law, and I'm very good at crim law. I was a public defender for years. But that wasn't the stuff that I had hammered. Right. And that wasn't the stuff that I had practiced. Right. So I felt a little beaten up by that. And the part, you know, they say never to talk to other bar takers, and this is so true, because when we walked out of that morning session with the essays, there were all these adorable children who said, oh, I was so glad I saw that. And I would hear what they were saying, and I was thinking, my God, you missed the turning, you know, the critical issue in that question, and you don't even know it. Yeah. That is, yeah. I feel so bad for them.
Well, apparently a lot of them did. I mean, given those statistics. It was
pretty obvious.
Yeah. So in our course, we talk a lot about writing about the disputes and focusing on facts and making arguments, doing more what a lawyer does. Was that approach helpful to you on the essays?
It was particularly helpful on the con law essay, because it was something to fall back on where I hadn't, you know, like I said, I've been in practice a long time. I know con law, but it was a First Amendment question. Mm-hmm. And it was just a structure that I could fall back on that helped me frame the dispute in my mind, not so much about, you know, let me identify what the issues are here, because that was probably a very difficult way to do that question. Yeah. And I think the critical point that a lot of people missed in that question was that the dispute was not ripe. Mm-hmm. And that was something that had to go in there. Otherwise, you were if you were a lawyer and this was your client, you were committing malpractice, right? Right. So, right. To have that approach where I could think about, well, what would each side say? And let me just jot down some notes about what the arguments are on both sides. That's what really made me think, whoa, this is not right. This isn't going to court. This answer is totally different than I would have thought at first blush.
Yeah, and let me just sort of point that out in juxtaposition. Again, for people who are in different jurisdictions, the same process is true. If you had gone to the exam with a memorized outline that said, here's everything I need to know. First of all, you wouldn't have studied federal con law because it's never been tested. But even if you had been prescient enough to do that, you would have had this big, long outline, and you would have missed what Olga's talking about, which is the case wasn't ripe. And when you think about it as a dispute, it changes the entire focus. So the idea of writing an essay based on what's in front of you, thinking about it like a lawyer, is radically different than this idea of here's my outline, here's all my elements, and here's everything I do, right? And so, yeah. So you walk out with the wounded on Tuesday morning. And then you get to come back Tuesday afternoon for Florida multiple choice. And what was that like?
Well, it was interesting because the questions were so discrete. And as you pointed out many times in the course, very poorly written. And sometimes there was just not enough information to answer the question, or there was some assumption that you had to understand or you couldn't answer the question. And that's always hard. You know, it was kind of like LSAT logic games, you know, what's the missing assumption?
Yeah, crazy stuff, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Luckily, that was my strong suit when I was a teacher and when I took the LSAT, and I'm still pretty good at that stuff. So I did not feel as beaten up by the multiple choice. It was really just the essays and the breadth of the essays that had me a bit shaken. Although even on the multiple choice, I used almost all the time, and that is very unusual for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and if you look at the mean scores off the exam, the multiple choice was actually a little higher than typical. I mean, the means were about 16, 17 points correct out of 30. But the means on the essays, holy cow, you know, 34 out of 100, 40 out of 100, 51.5 out of 100. Whoa, that's tough. That is really tough scoring.
Well, that's what I heard. I mean, that's what I heard at the convention center, because people were happy that they saw something familiar, but it was clear from what they were. I mean, I didn't talk to her. I talked to one or two people who were old people like me. People clearly missed it, and I could tell by what they were talking about. And you can't say like, oh, you really screwed that up. Good luck.
I agree. Well, so then the multi-state. The next day, which is a different exam than the one you took 14 years ago. We've got the addition of a new subject, different weighting of the topics. Questions are written a little bit differently. How did it feel to you? I mean, I know we've got a lot of people that follow these interviews who are like you, licensed or have taken the exam in years past. What would you tell them about how the multi-state has changed, in your opinion?
Well, the best part about what's happened on the multi-state is that there are no more of those Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3, and your answers are 1 and 2, 1 and 3, only 1. The elimination of that, I was kind of like, well, I can do the rest of this. It's just reading comp, you know?
Yeah. That's a big change. That is a big change.
Yeah.
What did you think about adding civil procedure and in its place taking away 6 or 7 questions from the other 6 subjects? That make any difference to you?
I mean, like I said, when you've been in practice for a while, and I happen to have a federal practice for the last 7 years of my career, that was a subject that I'm super comfortable with.
Yeah.
So it didn't really make a difference to me one way or the other. And in fact, that was a situation where if you are a practicing lawyer, much like evidence, you have to sort of fight the urge to get too technical and just kind of go with your gut reaction, which is what you suggested I do. Yeah. Because I did really well on the multi-state always, and I'm sure that I did fine on this multi-state too, because I'm just comfortable with that format. But you really have to go with your gut on some of the stuff, especially if you've been out of school for a while and your mind is just not in that framework because you're a practicing attorney. And so you know what the outcome is of those kinds of questions. And sometimes it just takes a little digging into the answer to understand that they're showing what it is.
When you and I talked, Olga, about prior to the bar exam, we were talking about how to do multi-state. And I said that what I wanted you to do was to read the questions and the question choices carefully, but answer them quickly to use your gut reaction. What was that like to take that approach?
You know, it really let me I read very slowly, and I read everything twice, and I always read this is a Kaplan trick, right? You read the question first, the prompt, the call, whatever you want to call it, the call of the question, so that you know what you're reading for, because otherwise it's just a big jumble. Right. And then you're going to have to read it a second time anyway. But once you do that, if you know what you're reading for and you read carefully, the multi-state is a very standardized, well-researched thing. It's kind of the opposite of Florida, right? Right. So the questions, there are not very many gotcha questions. And if you can arrive in your mind at the answer first, it'll jump out at you from the answer choices pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think that's really a great insight. I think that people sometimes expect that there's a hidden gotcha in all these questions, and the reality is that there probably isn't. So, go ahead.
Well, the ones that felt, the questions that I felt were like a little, well, this is strange. you could tell that those were the testers. You know what I mean? Like you could tell that those were not going to be the scored questions because they didn't have that, like, oh, clearly that's it. There was there was nothing definite in those quizzes, and you could tell what the testers were.
Right. There are 10 questions in each section typically that are used for that kind of evaluation purpose, and so definitely has an impact. So results day was on Monday. And what was that like to check your results?
Well, the weird thing is that this is the first time in 3 administrations of a bar exam that I wasn't sure that I passed. I really wasn't. Yeah. And I thought if I did pass, it's only because my score on the MultiState was so high that they were going to kick those points over to the essays. Mm-hmm. So I dropped off my kids at school and I went to my girlfriend's house because she's like, you should not be alone. You should come check it here. And so I said, all right. So I went over to her house and I said, I think I'll wait a little bit to check it. She's like, are you crazy? You gotta check it right now. And so I had to find my applicant number, which was annoying because I didn't have it with me. And then when I checked, there were a lot of people around me in the list. There were a lot of fail words. Mm-hmm. And so as I'm scanning for the number, I'm going, oh no, I was right. But then when I saw, pass, I was super excited and a little bit surprised.
Well, let me just say, you passed both sections of the exam. So there you go. It wasn't that you needed the MultiState to carry over.
Turns out.
Yeah. So that's good stuff. So if you were talking to somebody now who's thinking about taking the Florida bar, what advice would you have for them?
They should study. I mean, especially someone who's been out of school for a while. It took me probably about 3 or 4 weeks to just get into the mindset of, this is something that I have to do. It doesn't feel great. It doesn't make me any money, but it needs to be done. And it took a while to just amp up toward the level of studying that I needed to do. But, it was really helpful to have the syllabus, and I couldn't have been as disciplined as I was in a self-study situation. I just couldn't. And listen, nobody wanted to spend the money less than me, but
hey, my kids have got to eat too. Okay.
But it was totally fine. And relative to the other options, it was a really good choice just to have you to come to Jax, give me a little bit of feedback on what I'm doing. But I also think it's really important. I think I was pretty straightforward with you about what was going on, and I wasn't trying to, because I'm not a student and I don't care,
Yeah. So, and this is really an important point. Olga's kind of passing over it quickly, but let me just say that sometimes when I'm talking with students, bar takers, they try to blow smoke up my rear end about what they're doing or how it's going. And Olga was actually very candid about, I'm overwhelmed. I'm not doing as much as I should. I'm not focusing on this. Which then, I unloaded on her and said, no, you got to do this, this, and this, because my goal was to get her attention. It was pretty clear to me that she was smart enough, you are smart enough to pass the bar. And I thought, what a waste if you don't put in the effort. But a lot of times students tell me they're working and they're not. And so I thought that your candor was probably to your advantage, only in the sense that it let me kind of get you pointed in the right direction, and then you took that direction and followed it. So that was a good thing. So now you've got licenses in 4 jurisdictions. So now you're practicing in Florida, right?
Yeah.
So congratulations. I think it's wonderful news. You absolutely swam against the tide here. Toughest, you can tell people, you passed in the toughest bar exam in history. Certainly the worst pass rates that we've seen across the board in years and years and years, 25 years. And the weeping and gnashing of teeth is enormous. Lots of people didn't make it. you know, and yet I also know that there are a lot of people who, like you, are practicing in other jurisdictions and are intimidated by coming to Florida and taking the exam. And I do hope that by seeing your example, your result, knowing that you could do this with a family and work and all the other things going on, that it is possible to pass the exam, right?
Sure. I mean, it helps to have support, but it's, you know, it really was doable. And I think part of the doability was the amount of, even on in the self-study or whatever, like just the amount of structure that was there.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like if I just do these things, right, I paid for this expertise, right? So if I just take full advantage of this expertise, that's my best chance for succeeding no matter what. And so probably if I'd gotten started a little earlier, as you had suggested I should, I wouldn't have been so intense in the last month.
Yeah, I think that would have helped. But, you know, but you did it. You know, you did.
I'm a litigator, Jackson. I'm a litigator. That's how we do it.
Right. And we talked about you going into trial mode at the end, and that really seemed to connect for you and made sense. Well, I just want to congratulate you again and thank you for sharing your experience with our audience. I know it's going to mean a lot to them. And I look forward to great things from you as you continue your practice in Florida. But just so appreciative that you would spend the time today to share what the process was like in the experience. Again, our congratulations and good wishes as you go forward in the future. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks for your help.
Great. Glad to do it. All right, everybody. We will be back next time with another conversation with a passing bar taker. So glad you could be with us today. Thanks so much, and bye for now.